When a quiet man moves into a well-manicured HOA neighborhood, Karen, the self-appointed HOA queen, makes it her mission to control him. After snooping into his private life, she becomes convinced he's lying about his job. She storms into a meeting and screams that he's pretending to be FBI. But her voice cracked the moment the real agent stepped out from behind me, badges out, guns drawn, and her name already on their list. When actual agents show up, it turns out Karen has been under investigation for years, and her wild accusations just triggered the final phase of a covert sting operation. Welcome to the HOA Discover channel. If you find out this story interesting, hit the like button, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Let's get back to the story. The first time Karen saw him, he was unloading a few boxes from the back of a black SUV. No moving truck, no welcoming committee, no explanation. He wore plain clothes, black sunglasses, and carried himself with a sort of quiet confidence that immediately rubbed Karen the wrong way. To her, Sycamore Lane was not just a street, it was a kingdom. And she was its self-declared queen. She ran the HOA like a private militia. Every flower bed had to match the neighborhood standard. Every trash can had to be out by 7 a.m. and back by 7:30 p.m. sharp. And every new neighbor was expected to report to her like a new recruit arriving on base. But this man, whose mailbox simply read M. Rains, wasn't playing by the rules. Karen watched from her front window like she always did when new residents arrived. She had a clipboard with the HOA welcome packet already prepared, 27 pages of do's and don'ts, complete with a list of acceptable paint colors and a reminder that all lawn ornaments had to be HOA approved. But 2 days passed, and Rains didn't stop by. He didn't answer the door when she knocked. His lawn remained untrimmed, by half an inch, Karen noted. And worst of all, he didn't introduce himself at the weekly HOA social hour in the cul-de-sac. He thinks he's too good for us, Karen told her friend Cheryl over the phone as she sipped her morning coffee and scanned the sidewalk. Mark my words, something's off with him. That man is hiding something. Cheryl barely responded, too used to Karen's endless surveillance routines. But Karen was serious this time. The man's garbage didn't contain junk mail. His car had no license plate on the front. And his home, even days after moving in, looked barely lived in. No curtains. No visible furniture. No noise. One morning, Karen took her dog, Biscuit, for a casual walk that conveniently looped in front of Rain's house. She slowed down, pretending to adjust the leash, and peeked into the garage just as the automatic door began closing. What she glimpsed startled her, not storage bins or tools, but large black cases, military style, lined up like they belonged in an armory. She was sure of it now. He's law enforcement. Or worse, pretending to be. By the end of the week, Karen had compiled a list of suspicious behaviors. Didn't attend HOA meetings. Never made eye contact with neighbors. Had multiple Wi-Fi networks coming from his house. Received several locked cases via FedEx with no return labels. Walked outside only at dawn or late night, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. To most, he was just a quiet guy who kept to himself. But to Karen, he was a breach in the perfectly manicured system she had spent years constructing. She couldn't stand the mystery. The control she wielded over the community was being undermined by one man who didn't even acknowledge her presence. One afternoon, she sent him an official HOA violation notice, citing unmaintained lawn height and failure to respond to welcome procedures. She watched from her window as the envelope sat in his mailbox for 2 days untouched. When it finally disappeared, she expected him to come storming over in protest. But he didn't. Instead, he walked outside, gave a slow look around the neighborhood, and went back inside. Nothing more. To Karen, that silence was louder than any confrontation. And that terrified her. Karen Jennings had always prided herself on knowing everything about everyone on Sycamore Lane. She called it maintaining community standards. Most called it invasive. But this time, she told herself it was about safety. After the unsettling encounter with the mysterious new neighbor, Michael Rains, Karen's gut told her something was wrong. He hadn't responded to her violation notice. He hadn't attended the HOA coffee meetup. And he certainly didn't return her friendly wave when she fake-watered her roses to get a better look at his driveway. To Karen, that was all the proof she needed. He's hiding something, she muttered to herself, eyes fixed on his house through her binoculars from behind her bedroom curtains. Nobody's that quiet unless they have something to hide. That morning, she began her investigation. Her first step. License plate tracking. She noted the partial plate on his black SUV and entered it into one of the many shady online databases she subscribed to. Karen believed in being prepared, and that meant keeping a toolkit of spy apps, people search tools, and burner email accounts. She spent hours scrolling through vehicle records, cross-referencing addresses, and refreshing neighborhood watch apps. But the plate didn't return a match. Government-registered vehicle, maybe. That only fueled her obsession. Next, she turned her attention to the delivery drivers. Over the course of a week, she casually intercepted 4 different couriers heading to Rain's home. The UPS guy got the full treatment: cookies, lemonade, and pointed questions. "Oh, you deliver here often? What kind of packages does he get? Ever seem heavy? Dangerous?" Most just smiled politely and walked off, but one young FedEx driver slipped up and said, "He always has those government-marked cases. Kinda weird for a regular dude." Bingo! Karen nearly dropped her clipboard from excitement. That evening, she updated her case file, a thick binder she kept in a locked cabinet labeled Neighborhood Intelligence. It had tabs for Rain's movements, deliveries, and suspected affiliations. She even started cross-referencing timestamps from her doorbell camera with local police radio scanner logs. When she couldn't match anything suspicious, she was frustrated, but not deterred. She moved on to surveillance. Using her son's old drone, she took to the skies. From the air, she captured overhead shots of his backyard. Nothing illegal, but oddly barren. No grill. No garden. No kids' toys. Just bare dirt, trimmed edges, and a satellite dish bigger than anything she'd seen before. One night, just after midnight, she noticed the dish rotate ever so slightly. "He's transmitting something," she whispered in shock. The next morning, she made the boldest move of all: trespassing. While he was out jogging, she timed his routine down to the minute. Karen slipped through the side gate with her phone camera ready. She snapped photos of the garage door pad, the electric meter, and peered into a window. What she saw startled her: a wall lined with monitors, each displaying camera feeds, some clearly from outside other houses on the street. "He's watching us. All of us." She stumbled back, breath catching, panic mixing with vindication. She wasn't paranoid. She was right. Later that week, Karen made her move. At the HOA board meeting, in front of 16 residents and 3 members of the neighborhood watch, she stood up and dramatically declared, "I believe our new neighbor is pretending to be FBI, or worse. He's spying on us. He has surveillance equipment. He's a threat to our safety." Gasps rippled through the room. Some rolled their eyes. Others exchanged wary glances. But Karen didn't care. She had no idea that her crusade was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. Because what Karen didn't know was that Michael Rains wasn't pretending to be FBI. He was FBI. And her snooping had just triggered the final phase of an undercover sting operation years in the making. And she had just walked herself right into the center of it. It was standing room only at the HOA community hall that Thursday evening. The air buzzed with low murmurs, clinking coffee cups, and Karen's signature perfume, something strong, floral, and undeniably aggressive. She had arrived early as always, claiming the center seat at the long folding table used by board members. But tonight, she wasn't there to moderate. Tonight, she was there to expose. Karen's eyes darted toward the back of the room as Michael Rains entered quietly, dressed in a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. No briefcase, no folder, not even a pen. He took a seat in the farthest corner, arms folded, face unreadable. If his calm demeanor was a mask, it was flawless. "He's too calm," Karen whispered to Cheryl, who sat beside her looking equal parts nervous and exhausted. The meeting kicked off with the usual nonsense: lawn maintenance updates, a reminder about Halloween decorations, and a passive-aggressive discussion about dog poop not being picked up on Lot 17. But Karen didn't hear a word. Her fingers tapped the table in rhythm with her rising adrenaline. Her evidence binder rested on her lap, bulging with photos, charts, and handwritten notes. She had waited weeks for this moment. And then the president of the HOA, Mr. Douglas, asked the crowd, "Are there any other concerns before we wrap up?" Karen stood. "I have something," she said loudly, her voice slicing through the hum of polite conversation like a dagger. She cleared her throat theatrically. "It concerns the safety of our entire community." All eyes turned toward her. Michael didn't move. Karen held up a stack of papers. "I believe we have a fraud living among us. A man who has refused to comply with basic HOA rules, who receives military-grade shipments, who has surveillance equipment pointed at our homes, and who falsely claims to be a federal agent." Murmurs turned into open whispers. A few phones came out. Someone started recording. Karen pointed a dramatic, shaking finger at the back of the room. "That man right there, Michael Raines, is not who he says he is. He's pretending to be FBI." The crowd turned. Michael slowly rose to his feet. The room held its breath. He took 2 steps forward and looked directly at Karen. Then, in a voice calm and chillingly measured, he asked, "Are you sure you want to do this publicly, Karen?" The question hit like a brick. A few people laughed nervously, thinking it was a clever retort. But Karen's smile faltered. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong, deeply wrong. Michael reached into his back pocket and slowly pulled out a small leather case. He opened it. Inside was a badge. An FBI badge. Not a fake. Not a novelty. The room gasped. But before Karen could sputter a word, the door behind Michael swung open, and in walked 3 more men, wearing dark suits and earpieces, badges visible. The tallest one stepped forward. "Special Agent Carter, FBI. We'll be taking it from here." Karen's legs gave out as she stumbled back into her chair. Her mouth opened, then closed, like a fish out of water. Her entire face drained of color. The room fell into stunned silence. Agent Carter turned to the HOA board. "Ladies and gentlemen, your neighbor Michael Raines has been working undercover for the past 6 months investigating financial crimes and property fraud connected to this community." Karen tried to stand, tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Michael's eyes never left hers. "You did a lot of snooping, Karen. Too bad you didn't realize you were the one being watched." The agent stepped forward and placed Karen in handcuffs. She didn't resist. She couldn't. Her crusade, her obsession, her power, it had all unraveled in an instant. As she was escorted out of the room, neighbors whispered behind their hands, filming every step. Her reign was over. Her legacy wasn't neighborhood order, it was federal arrest. And as the door closed behind her, Michael turned back to the stunned crowd and gave a small, tired smile. Meeting adjourned. The echo of Michael Raines' words, "Are you sure you want to do this publicly, Karen?" had barely faded when the silence in the room grew unbearable. You could have heard a pin drop, or the quiet static from someone's cell phone recording still running in their pocket. Karen froze in place. Her throat was dry, but her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She glanced around the room expecting applause or agreement, but instead, she saw something worse: doubt. Even Cheryl looked like she wasn't so sure anymore. Then the air shifted. The double doors at the back of the HOA hall swung open with a crisp, mechanical movement, not hurried but precise. 3 men stepped inside. They were dressed in dark suits, not flashy, but official. One carried a tablet. The other 2 moved with silent synchronization. The man in the middle, tall and broad with a square jaw and buzz cut, walked forward with cool confidence. The tall agent raised a hand and, in a voice so calm it almost didn't fit the tension in the room, said, "Karen Jennings, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you." Gasps erupted around the room. A few people stood instinctively. Others backed away. Cheryl slowly pulled her purse off her lap and slid her chair 2 inches back. Karen blinked. "What?" she stammered. Michael Rains turned to face the agents, offering a nod. They responded with the same confirmation, not surprise. Agent Carter, his badge now out and gleaming, approached the table where Karen sat paralyzed. "We've been monitoring your activity for over 9 months," he said. "Mr. Rains has been operating as our embedded analyst and field liaison in this neighborhood." Karen's mouth opened to speak, but all that came out was a stammered, I was just trying to protect the community." Agent Carter raised an eyebrow. "By wiretapping neighbors? Submitting fraudulent citations? Stealing private mail? Diverting HOA funds to shell landscaping companies that never existed?" Karen's face went pale. Her eyes darted wildly. I don't know what you're talking about." But it was too late. The agent with the tablet tapped a few times, then held the screen out for her to see. Photos, documents, videos. Her entering Michael's backyard with a phone camera. Her shredding HOA documents in her garage. Her signing fake invoices with forged contractor names. The room behind her erupted into whispers and gasps. Mr. Douglas stood halfway, unsure whether to intervene or hide behind the podium. Cheryl covered her mouth with both hands, now fully realizing her best friend wasn't just nosy, she was criminal. Michael stepped closer now, standing at Carter's side. He looked at Karen with a kind of sorrow in his eyes. Not pity, not anger. Just quiet disappointment. "You were never my target," he said softly. "Until you made yourself one." Karen shook her head furiously. "You tricked us. You lied. You pretended to be one of us." Michael gave a small shrug. "No, I was one of you. Until you tried to frame me as a fake federal agent." Agent Carter reached into his coat and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Karen backed up against the wall, almost tripping over her tote bag filled with color-coded HOA folders. "This is insane," she whispered, voice cracking. "I was just trying to keep order." "You tried to control," Carter said flatly. "And now, you're going to answer for it." He read her rights as the other agents flanked her and gently but firmly cuffed her hands behind her back. The entire room watched, stunned. Not a soul moved. Not a single voice spoke up for her. In a neighborhood where Karen had ruled with an iron clipboard, no one came to her defense. She was escorted out of the HOA hall, her heels clicking awkwardly against the floor tiles as they left. As the door swung shut behind them, silence lingered for a beat. Then, slowly, someone clapped. Then, another. Soon the entire room erupted in applause, not for Karen's downfall, but for freedom. For the end of her tyrannical reign. Michael nodded once, then turned toward the board. "I'll submit my final report to your incoming president. My work here is done." He started for the door, but not before stopping to glance back at the stunned crowd. "For the record," he said with a sly grin, "I am FBI." And just like that, he was gone. The shockwave of Karen Jennings' arrest rippled through the neighborhood like thunder after a lightning strike. Some residents were stunned into silence. Others treated it like a victory parade. But none of them knew the whole story. Not yet. Behind the scenes, a far more intricate picture was unfolding, one that reached beyond Sycamore Lane, beyond the HOA, and even beyond Karen herself. The truth was this: Karen Jennings wasn't just a power-hungry busybody. She was the keystone of a much larger network. And Michael Rains hadn't moved into the neighborhood by chance. He was placed there. 5 months earlier, deep in the marble halls of a federal building in Washington, D.C., a confidential file had landed on Special Agent Michael Rains' desk. The case title: Operation Evergreen. Its target: a sprawling corruption ring exploiting HOAs across 3 states, using fake vendor contracts, inflated maintenance fees, shell companies, and a web of influence to funnel HOA money into private accounts. One name came up again and again. Karen Jennings. She wasn't at the top. Not yet. But she was the enabler. Her name was on over 32 suspicious disbursements in under 2 years. Her HOA pushed the same landscaping vendor, a company that didn't exist on any public registry. Every time neighbors questioned HOA fees, their citations would mysteriously increase. Residents who resisted were met with fines, property devaluations, or even threats. And every single board member who voted against her either resigned mysteriously or disappeared from records entirely. She didn't just enforce rules, she enforced control. The Bureau needed someone inside. Not a raid. Not surveillance from afar. They needed someone Karen wouldn't suspect, someone who could live next door, quietly observe, earn trust, and dig deep. That's where Michael came in. He was briefed, trained, and moved in under a falsified identity. His job was listed as a cybersecurity contractor. His vehicle? Government-issued, disguised with civilian tags. His home? Fitted with covert surveillance equipment and a secure link to the Bureau. At first, he stayed off Karen's radar. He kept quiet, followed rules just enough to avoid attention. But Karen, ever paranoid, took interest the moment he didn't attend a community brunch. That was her first mistake. What she didn't know was that every time she stood across from his house with binoculars, Michael saw her, on high-definition thermal imaging. Every fake citation she mailed him? Documented. Every time she redirected HOA funds to the ghost landscaping firm? Traced. Michael's internal logs captured everything. Phone calls with her contractors, off-the-record meetings in her garage, falsified inspection reports, and even private messages to HOA members she blackmailed into silence. And it all went straight into the Bureau's evidence vault. But Michael wasn't working alone. A week before Karen's public accusation, the FBI had quietly moved into position. Undercover agents posed as postal workers, HVAC techs, even dog walkers. One of them, Doug the trash guy, was actually Agent Rodriguez, who had been collecting discarded drafts of Karen's falsified reports from her recycling bins for weeks. The data built a mountain too high to climb. Bank accounts in offshore havens. Dozens of inflated invoices from non-existent vendors. Unexplained cash withdrawals matching emergency HOA expenditures. Still, Michael needed her to slip publicly, to give them cause for a visible takedown. When Karen accused him of impersonating an FBI agent in front of witnesses and on camera, she crossed the line from suspicion to criminal obstruction. That triggered the operation's final phase. The moment the agents entered the HOA hall, Karen was already done. Michael's job was complete. Behind closed doors, Karen confessed more than expected. She admitted to coordinating with regional HOA boards in 2 other counties. She gave up names, higher-ups, lawyers, even an accountant posing as a consultant for 7 other neighborhoods. Operation Evergreen had cracked wide open. Karen Jennings, once queen of Sycamore Lane, was now federal witness number 7 in the largest HOA corruption investigation in state history. And Michael. His next assignment was already waiting. He looked back at the neighborhood one last time. Quiet, sunlit, and finally free. Mission complete. The echo of Karen's heels clacking down the HOA hall faded as the agents escorted her out, leaving behind a stunned silence. But the real unraveling of her carefully woven empire was only just beginning. Within hours of her arrest, the FBI executed a sealed search warrant on her home, house number 27, the self-proclaimed command center of the HOA. Neighbors watched from behind curtains and through smartphone lenses as black SUVs parked silently on her driveway and agents poured in, gloves on, tools in hand, eyes cold with purpose. Inside, the pristine illusion of Karen's world began to shatter. Behind the linen closets and alphabetized spice racks were false walls, hidden compartments, and locked filing cabinets, each one crammed with evidence. Paper records, phone transcripts, burner phones, and what investigators would later call a blackmail map. A corkboard laced with strings connecting residents to threats, weaknesses, and manipulated outcomes. One file was labeled Douglas, leverage, tax evasion. Another, Cheryl, HOA loyalty, but watch her. Another simply read, Michael, unknown threat warning. What stunned the agents most wasn't the level of documentation, it was the tone. Karen hadn't just enforced HOA policy. She had orchestrated a campaign of surveillance and intimidation like a small-town tyrant with a god complex. Her digital footprint revealed an entire operating system built for control, an encrypted laptop filled with resident profiles, security footage, and even email she'd forged under other people's names to sway HOA votes. The extent of her influence was staggering. She hadn't just manipulated the board, she was the board. Within 48 hours, every remaining member of the HOA board was contacted by the Bureau. Some cooperated willingly, stunned by how thoroughly they'd been misled. Others tried to distance themselves, insisting they had no idea Karen had faked contractor bids or rerouted community funds. But the paper trail was unforgiving. President Douglas was the first to resign. She told me she was protecting the neighborhood, he muttered during an emergency session. She said those citations were real. She showed me fake complaints from residents. I believed her. His voice cracked. She made me sign off on it all. One by one, the others followed. Cheryl broke down in tears after learning Karen had logged private conversations they'd had over wine nights, some of which Karen later used to blackmail her into approving budget increases. She made me feel like I was part of something bigger, Cheryl admitted. Turns out I was just another piece on her board. But not all board members were innocent. Treasurer Linda Peterson was later found to have deposited over $48,000 into a private account linked to one of Karen's shell vendors. She would be charged. Vice President Edgar Willis, it turned out, had signed off on emergency legal fees that led directly to Karen's personal attorney, who wasn't even licensed in the state. The HOA crumbled. Residents demanded new elections. They filed for audits, sued the association, and some even considered dissolving it altogether. The entire neighborhood had been held hostage under the illusion of order, and now the truth stung like a fresh wound. For Karen, the fall was steep and merciless. She was charged with wire fraud, racketeering, identity theft, blackmail, illegal surveillance, and impersonating a public official. Her bail was denied. The judge cited her as a flight risk and a master manipulator with concerning knowledge of surveillance and coercion. In court, she sat motionless, clad in an orange jumpsuit, her perfect bun replaced with messy curls. When asked if she had anything to say, she looked at the gallery of her former neighbors and said, coldly, I built that neighborhood, and they turned on me. But no one in the room felt pity. Karen's era of power was over. What she had created through fear, deception, and obsession was now nothing more than an entry in a federal case file. And for the first time in years, Sycamore Lane felt the stirrings of something new. Freedom. In the days following Karen Jennings' arrest, Sycamore Lane underwent a transformation, not just in structure, but in spirit. The manicured lawns remained, the painted fences still stood, and the morning joggers resumed their routines. But something was undeniably different. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a performance, it felt real. The fear that once lingered in every mailbox and every overly polite HOA email had lifted like morning fog. Where once residents had whispered behind closed doors, they now spoke freely on front porches. Block parties returned. Children played without being shushed for violating noise ordinances. And old friendships, once fractured by suspicion, began to heal. The HOA held emergency elections in the community center, the same hall where Karen had screamed accusations and where federal agents had walked her out in cuffs. This time, there were no whispers of intimidation, no veiled threats, just transparent discussion, neighborly debate, and ballots cast in the open. Cheryl, after publicly apologizing for her blind loyalty to Karen, was surprisingly nominated and voted in as the new HOA president, a decision that initially raised eyebrows but ultimately brought closure. She vowed transparency and made good on it by publishing financial records monthly, hosting public meetings in the park, and appointing residents from all ends of the neighborhood, not just her circle. One of her first acts? Replacing the ominous HOA citation Dropbox with a community suggestion board titled, "How can we make Sycamore Lane better?" The neighbors responded. Someone asked for a community garden. Another suggested a neighborhood tool-sharing shed. A teen proposed painting murals on the drab concrete wall near the east cul-de-sac. For the first time in years, residents weren't just subjects, they were contributors. But the man who had set all of this in motion, Michael Raines, was no longer there. His house, once the subject of Karen's paranoia, now stood quiet. Vacant. A for sale sign rested in the lawn, but no one dared remove the hand-painted stone placed beside it that read, "Thank you, Mike. We remember." People spoke his name with reverence now, not suspicion. Stories swirled, that he'd been FBI all along, that he'd uncovered a larger conspiracy, that he'd protected them even when they didn't know they needed protection. Most of it was true. Some was exaggerated. But none of it changed the impact he had left behind. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid his yard now walked by slowly, nodding in silent respect. A few weeks later, a package arrived at Cheryl's door. No return address. Inside was a framed photo of the Sycamore Lane sign, sunset behind it, shadows long, golden hour at its best. On the back was a handwritten note. "You don't need someone watching over you anymore. You've got this, Mike." Tears welled in Cheryl's eyes. She hung it in the community center, just above the door, where it remains to this day. Still, echoes of the past remained. Some neighbors struggled to trust the HOA again. Others still felt shame for being complicit in Karen's reign, whether through silence or inaction. But that, too, began to change. Healing wasn't instant. It was slow. It came in the form of shared laughs at barbecues, morning dog walks with people they'd once ignored, and evening street lamp chats that turned into lasting friendships. The scars of Karen's rule would never fully disappear, but they no longer defined the neighborhood. In their place bloomed something new. Community. And as for Michael? No one knew where he'd been transferred. Some said he was in another town, already undercover in another neighborhood. Others believed he'd retired quietly, his last mission complete. But one thing was certain. Sycamore Lane would never forget him. 2 months had passed since the dust settled on Sycamore Lane. Autumn was beginning to show in gentle golden touches across the trees. Somewhere far away, in a small, quiet town known only to a few, Michael Raines sat on a bench beside a lazy river, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. He wore no badge. No wire. Just a worn leather jacket and a weathered smile. The bureau had offered him a commendation, a desk job, even a transfer to a high-level task force. He declined all of it. He'd done his part. He'd seen enough shadows. Now, he just wanted silence, peace, and the satisfaction of having made something right. The only sound was the breeze, until the postman approached. "Agent Raines?" the man asked. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Not anymore," he said with a smirk. "Well," the postman said, holding out a padded envelope, "this is still for you." Inside, wrapped in protective plastic and lined with hand-drawn cards from neighborhood kids, was a thick envelope marked in flowing script, "From your friends on Sycamore Lane." Michael unfolded the letter and began to read. "Dear Mike, we don't know where you are. We don't even know if you'll get this. But we had to try. Sycamore Lane isn't what it was. It's better now, freer, kinder, alive. There are still arguments, of course. We're still neighbors. But now when we disagree, we laugh more than we shout. The fear is gone. The kids run through the sprinklers again. The fences are painted with colors no one asked permission for, and no one minds. The community garden is growing faster than we can manage, and Cheryl has promised not to enforce any fines for creative landscaping. Every single day, someone brings up your name. Whether it's at a potluck or during cleanup or even during board meetings, we remember what you did. We didn't thank you properly before. So here it is now, thank you. Not just for protecting us, but for reminding us what community is supposed to be. We hope wherever you are, you're safe, you're proud, and you know, you always have a home on Sycamore Lane. With love. All of us. P.S. The mural on the community wall? It's of you, walking away, hands in your pockets, into the sunset. We named it, The Guardian We Didn't Know We Had. Michael folded the letter gently and leaned back, eyes misting. He looked out at the river, where sunlight danced on the water, and exhaled a long, quiet breath. Mission complete. He may have left Sycamore Lane behind, but a part of him would always live there.